Okay, what's the point of Leviticus? Who can tell me that? This is going to be quite the accomplishment if we make it through 3 months of Leviticus class and we still actually can't answer the question, what's the point of Leviticus?
How an imperfect people will make themselves to meet a holy God.
How an imperfect people made themselves to meet a holy God. Thank you, John. Can you remember a passage calling us priests? 1 Peter 2. Revelation. Is that what you said, Michelle? Yeah, Revelation 1. Good. Do you remember elements of the consecration process for priests in Leviticus 8 and 9? Wash with water, new clothes, anointed with oil, lots of blood, eating a meal, right? And then waiting for the consecration. What would be a short answer about why all the clean and unclean laws in Leviticus 11 to 15? Because God said so, right? And God is holy. And God defines what holiness is and calls on his people, to John's point earlier, to be holy as he is holy. He is going to dwell with them. And then what basic
burden of the people's sins were put on it, and it was set loose in the wilderness.
There we go. Thank you, Michael. This is how we've stated officially the point of Leviticus here. It's another way of saying what John said earlier, to instruct Israel in what is required of Yahweh to dwell with them, namely the atonement that is required to cover their sin, to blot out their sin so that God can dwell with them, but also the holiness that is required of them as he is holy. I'm going to put this all on you for this time. Course goals. Do you remember what it is, biggest level we're trying to accomplish in this class? What's the first one? What did you say? Get through it, yeah. Take seriously the holiness of God. Thank you, Michelle. Second goal is give thanks for Jesus. Thank you, Mike, our atonement and our high priest. And then finally, live lives of consecration as priests. I don't know if we've really spelled all this out, but the word consecrated, sanctified, holy, all of that is kind of part of the same word family that's set apart. So we're trying to live set apart, consecrated lives as priests who are set apart for Yahweh. And then today in chapters 18 to 20, what we want to accomplish by the end of our time is, one, to identify the two areas in which Israel's moral code was most remarkable. Recite the command of Leviticus 19, 17, and 18, and be able to say where it's referenced in the New Testament, and then explain the connection between the laws of ritual purity, which we saw earlier in the book, and laws of moral purity. Remember, the book of Leviticus has this kind of reverse parallelism structure, and so the Day of Atonement, we said last week, is the middle of that, and hopefully we could appreciate after last week why the Day of Atonement really is central to everything that's going on in the book of Leviticus. So it sits right there in the middle, the target of the book. But then just outside of the Day of Atonement, we had laws of ritual purity in 11 to 15. Today we're looking at laws for moral purity. And so that relates to our last objective of kind of tying those together. We'll get to that if we have time. But for now, I actually want to read all of this instruction here. Okay, I know that's quite a bit. But we have said that we want to not shy away from the text of Leviticus. And so let's read here starting in Leviticus 18 and read Leviticus 18, 19, and 20 and just kind of immerse ourselves in this and get a sense of the moral law requirements of Israel that God sets forth here. Leviticus 18, starting in verse 1. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the people of Israel and say to them, I am the Lord your God. You shall not do as they do in the land of Egypt, where you lived. You shall not do as they do in the land of Canaan, to which I am bringing you. You shall not walk in their statutes. You shall follow my rules and keep my statutes and walk in them. I am the Lord your God. You shall therefore keep my statutes and my rules If a person does them, he shall live by them. I am the Lord. None of you shall approach any one of his close relatives to uncover nakedness. I am the Lord. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father, which is the nakedness of your mother. She is your mother. You shall not uncover her nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's wife. It is your father's nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your sister, your father's daughter, or your mother's daughter, whether brought up in the family or in another home. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your son's daughter or your daughter's daughter, for their nakedness is your own nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's wife's daughter, brought up in your father's family, since she is your sister. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's sister. She is your father's relative. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your mother's sister. She is your mother's relative. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's brother. That is, you shall not approach his wife. She is your aunt. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your daughter-in-law. She is your son's wife. You shall not uncover her nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your brother's wife. It is your brother's nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of a woman and of her daughter. You shall not take her son's daughter or her daughter's daughter to uncover her nakedness. They are relatives. It is depravity. And you shall not take a woman as a rival wife to her sister, uncovering her nakedness while her sister is still alive. Verse 19, you shall not approach a woman to uncover her nakedness while she is in menstrual uncleanness. And you shall not lie sexually with your neighbor's wife, and so make yourself unclean with her. You shall not give any of your children to offer them to Molech, and so profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. You shall not lie with a male as with a woman. It is abomination. You shall not lie with any animal, or so make yourself unclean with it. Neither shall any woman give herself to an animal to lie with it. It is perversion. Verse 24, do not make yourselves unclean by any of these things, for by all these the nations I am driving out before you have become unclean. And the land became unclean, so that I punished its iniquity, and the land vomited out its inhabitants. But you shall keep my statutes and my rules, and do none of these abominations, either the native or the stranger who sojourns among you. For the people of the land who were before you did all these abominations, so that the land became unclean. Lest the land vomit you out when you make it unclean, as I vomited out the nation that was before you. For everyone who does any of these abominations, the people who do them shall be cut off from among their people. So keep my charge never to practice any of these abominable customs that were practiced before you, and never to make yourselves unclean by them. I am the Lord. Chapter 19, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to all the congregation of the people of Israel, and say to them, you shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. Every one of you shall revere his mother and his father, and you shall keep my Sabbaths. I am the Lord your God. Do not turn to idols, or make yourselves any gods, or cast metal. I am the Lord your God. When you offer a sacrifice of peace offerings to the Lord, you shall offer it so that it may be accepted. It shall be eaten the same day you offer it, or on the day after. Anything left over until the third day shall be burned up with fire. If it is eaten at all on the third day, it is tainted, it will not be accepted, and everyone who eats it shall bear his iniquity, because he has profaned what is holy to the Lord. And that person shall be cut off from his people. When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall reap your field right up to its edge, neither shall you gather the gleanings after you harvest. You shall not strip your vineyard bare, neither shall you gather the fallen grapes of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and for the sojourner. I am the Lord your God. You shall not steal, you shall not deal falsely, you shall not lie to one another, you shall not swear by my name falsely, and so profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. You shall not oppress your neighbor or rob him. The wages of a hired servant shall not remain with you all night until the morning. You shall not curse the deaf or put a stumbling block before the blind, but you shall fear your God. I am the Lord. You shall do no injustice in court. You shall not be partial to the poor or defer to the great, but in righteousness shall you judge your neighbor. You shall not go around as a slanderer among your people. You shall not stand up against the life of your neighbor. I am the Lord. Verse 17, you shall not hate your brother in your heart. You shall reason frankly with your neighbor, lest you incur sin because of him. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. You shall keep my statutes. You shall not let your cattle breed with a different kind. You shall not sow your field with two kinds of seed. You shall not wear a garment of cloth made of two kinds of material. If a man lies sexually with a woman who is a slave, assigned to another man and not yet ransomed or given her freedom, a distinction shall be made. They shall not be put to death because she was not free, But he shall bring his compensation to the Lord, to the entrance of the tent of meeting, a ram for a guilt offering. And the priest shall make atonement for him with the ram of the guilt offering before the Lord for his sin that he has committed. He shall be forgiven for the sin that he has committed. When you come into the land and plant any kind of tree for food, you shall regard its fruit as forbidden. 3 years it shall be forbidden to you. You must not eat it. And the 4th year all its fruit shall be holy, an offering of praise to the Lord. But in the 5th year you may eat its fruit, to increase its yield for you. I am the Lord your God. You shall not eat any flesh with the blood in it. You shall not interpret omens or tell fortunes. You shall not round off the hair on your temples, or mar the edges of your beard. You shall not make any cuts on your body for the dead, or tattoo yourselves. I am the Lord. Do not profane your daughter by making her a prostitute, lest the land fall into prostitution and the land become full of depravity. You shall keep my Sabbaths and reverence my sanctuary. I am the Lord. Verse 31, do not turn to mediums or necromancers. Do not seek them out, and so make yourselves unclean by them. I am the Lord your God. You shall stand up before the gray head and honor the face of an old man, and you shall fear your God. I am the Lord. When a stranger sojourns with you in your land, you shall not do him wrong. You shall treat the stranger who sojourns with you as the native among you. You shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. You shall do no wrong in judgment, in measures of length or weight or quantity. You shall have just balances, just weights, a just ephah and a just hin. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. You shall observe all my statutes and all my rules and do them. I am the Lord. Chapter 20. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, say to the people of Israel, any one of the people of Israel or the strangers who sojourns in Israel, who gives any of his children to Molech, shall surely be put to death. The people of the land shall stone him with stones. I myself will set my face against that man and will cut him off from among his people, because he has given one of his children to Molech, to make my sanctuary unclean and to profane my holy name. And if the people of the land do at all close their eyes to that man when he gives one of his children to Molech, do not put him to death, then I will set my face against that man and against his clan, and will cut them off from among their people, him and all who follow him in whoring after Molech. If a person turns to mediums and necromancers, whoring after them, I will set my face against that person and will cut him off from among his people. Consecrate yourselves, therefore, and be holy, for I am the Lord your God. Keep my statutes and do them. I am the Lord who sanctifies you. For anyone who curses his father and mother shall surely be put to death. He has cursed his father or his mother. His blood is upon him. Verse 10. If a man commits adultery with the wife of his neighbor, both the adulterer and the adulteress shall surely be put to death. If a man lies with his father's wife, he has uncovered his father's nakedness. Both of them shall surely be put to death. Their blood is upon them. If a man lies with his daughter-in-law, both of them shall surely be put to death. They have committed perversion. Their blood is upon them. If a man lies with a male as with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood is upon them. If a man takes a woman and her mother also, it is depravity. He and they shall be burned with fire, that there may be no depravity among you. If a man lies with an animal, he shall surely be put to death, and he shall kill the animal. If a woman approaches any animal and lies with it, you shall kill the woman and the animal. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood is upon them. If a man takes his sister, a daughter of his father, or a daughter of his mother, and sees her nakedness, and she sees his nakedness, it is a disgrace. They shall be cut off in the sight of the children of their people. He has uncovered his sister's nakedness, and he shall bear his iniquity. If a man lies with a woman during her menstrual period and uncovers her nakedness, he has made naked her fountain. She has uncovered the fountain of her blood. Both of them shall be cut off from among their people. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your mother's sister or of your father's sister, for that is to make naked one's relative. They shall bear their iniquity. If a man lies with his uncle's wife, he has uncovered his uncle's nakedness. They shall bear their sin. They shall die childless. If a man takes his brother's wife, it is impurity. He has uncovered his brother's nakedness. They shall be childless. Verse 22, you shall therefore keep all my statutes and all my rules and do them, that the land where I am bringing you to live may not vomit you out. You shall not walk in the customs of the nation that I am driving out before you, for they did all these things, and therefore I detested them. But I have said to you, you shall inherit the land, and I will give it to you to possess, a land flowing with milk and honey. I am the Lord your God, who has separated you from the peoples. You shall therefore separate the clean beast from the unclean, and the unclean bird from the clean. You shall not make yourselves detestable by beast or by bird or anything with which the ground crawls, which I have set apart for you to hold unclean. You shall be holy to me, for I, the Lord, am holy and have separated you from the peoples that you should be mine. A man or woman who is a medium or necromancer shall surely be put to death. They shall be stoned with stones. Their blood shall be upon them. Okay. I want you guys to talk amongst yourselves for a little bit. 2 questions I want you to discuss with your neighbors. How would you summarize these laws? Okay, that was a lot, I know. That was on purpose. All of this that you just read, how would you summarize it? How would you boil it down? What would be the cliff notes? What would be the kind of 2 or 3 bullet points for summarizing these laws in chapters 18 to 20? And then also discuss with your neighbors, what's the reasoning behind it? What's the rationale given in the text for why these laws should be kept? Okay, talk amongst yourselves for a couple minutes, and then we'll share back out shortly. All right, seems like things are settling down. Share out, what do you think? First of all, how would we summarize? How would you boil it down? Anita?
So I thought about sexual morality.
Okay.
Or immorality.
Yeah.
Holiness and social justice, and then punishment for sin.
Okay. Sexual morality, immorality, holiness, social justice, and punishment for sin. Thank you, Anita. Mike?
I said be holy in your body, be holy in your action, and be holy in your interaction.
What am I doing up here, man? Okay, be holy in your body, be holy in your action, be holy in your interaction. Thank you, Mike. Jordan? Oh, John?
I think we were commenting on how it's so exhaustive. It might have been easier to say, summarize something but maybe it was just to make sure that everyone who couldn't take care of themselves was taken care of.
Okay, thank you, John. Mike?
Looked at it this way before, but as you were reading it, to me it really took the 10 Commandments and broke it down and said, this is what I've told you back here in the big rules. This is how you apply the big rules. I hadn't looked at it that way before.
Sure. No, thank you, Mike. Yeah, you hit some of those verses that almost sound verbatim, and then that triggers your mind to say, oh, well, that sound, no graven image. Oh, I know where that comes from. And then you start to look at, well, yeah, these other laws match up with this other commandment. And you start to see, yeah, there is an expansion of those 10 words. Sure. Yeah, again, that's what Paul said about it's a tutor to kind of help us come to maturity with some of that. Okay, so yeah, I think, and this was in your booklet if you were filling that out, but I think the 2 categories that stand out, especially in terms of comparing this law code with others of the same time and place, the high standard of sexual conduct is one that definitely sets the law of Moses apart. And then, as Anita mentioned, social justice or social relations. John mentioned taking care of those in society that can't take care of themselves. That is clearly, those are really the big ones in terms of categories. But I mean, the way y'all summarized that, I thought was excellent. Okay, what about rationale? What did you talk about for that? The reasoning given here for why these laws should be kept. Justin?
So one thing that kind of stood out in it is the level of detail that it goes into in these 3 chapters and the many different things that it lists out. And you kind of question, like, does it need to go into that much detail? Like, couldn't they give a quick summary of a lot of these things? But I think it kind of ties back to when the inhabitants of the land were driven out previously and the surrounding nations. It seems like a lot of these things were practices that they partook of. So it's separating the people from the nations around them and making them holy, and then kind of tying that back into the overall point of Leviticus. It's defining those parameters to make it so that God can dwell among his people in this land.
Okay, thank you, Justin. So we have a separation from the peoples of the land where they're going into, and a distinction so that God can live among them. Brian, what do you say about the rationale for these commands here?
Well, I see the heavy emphasis upon sexual morality, which is basically the union of the person's body to many others that are prohibited. And so I see it in the context of the purpose of Leviticus, of living with the holy God, or God being able to live with us. after doing the wedding, I see the covenant relationship of husband to wife, but we have a union with God. Therefore, God has defined how you are going to have union in the flesh as a symbol of our relationship to him, is the way I see it.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Brian. And really here, the one I didn't put up here is the one that Justin's commented, Brian's commented, and really it's the most important. What was the phrase used over and over again, stuck kind of like a tagline on the end of almost every one of these paragraphs? I am the Lord, I am the Lord, I am the Lord, okay? And so that tells us, again, in the context of Leviticus, which with both Justin and Brian have referred to here, that's critical. In the context of Leviticus, there's a few things we remember from that statement, I am the Lord. One of those is what Mike said at the beginning of class. God's the one who defines holiness, okay? He's the creator, we are not, so he gives us the law and we obey it, right? There's that kind of statement of authority. But also in Leviticus, saying I am the Lord gets to this point of God dwelling among his people, right? And so this reminder, I am the Lord and I'm living among you, right, is that motivation, that rationale of being holy as he is holy, respecting the boundaries that he has drawn so that he can live with his people and dwell among them, okay? That's the big one that's not actually up here, but the other two have also been mentioned. You saw how many times there was this, or several times there was this comment about being distinct from the nations, both the nation they came out of, Egypt, and the nations where they are going in Canaan. And then there's this other piece which is very fascinating to discuss. We don't have time for it. But there's several comments about the land itself. And it's like the land itself was just tired. Like the mountains, the hills, the valleys, right, the rivers. All these things that God created, right? We're so tired of the immorality of the people living in this land that it spewed them out. Okay, that's the language that's used in this. And so now I'm giving you this land. It's a good land. It's a land flowing with milk and honey. Maybe it's respect the gift I'm giving you. Maybe it's, again, respect the boundaries of creation, or creation itself will reject you. And you see other kind of tidbits like this throughout the Bible story, but there is this interesting connection to the land itself is bothered when it sees sin and it has experienced the violence done to it or in it by the people. And so respect the land, respect the gift I'm giving you so that it doesn't vomit you out the way that it vomited out the previous inhabitants. Okay, let's go to this. And I want to try something here. You may recall that the objective for this class, one of them was to recite the command of Leviticus 19, 17, and 18. Okay, so I want to actually start maybe practicing here towards being able to recite this command. So let's do this to start out. I've got this line by line here. I will read it. I'll put it up, I'll read it, and then I want you to say the line back to me, right? Like Brian did yesterday with Ethan and Emily, okay? So we'll go through line by line. I'll say it, and then you say it back to me. You ready? You shall not hate your brother in your heart, but you shall reason frankly with your neighbor, lest you incur sin because of him. Okay, let's try 17 again here. Let's maybe just put them all up. Do that. Make it easier on me, not have to click. You shall not hate your brother in your heart, but you shall reason frankly with your neighbor, lest you incur sin because of him. Okay, let's go on to 18. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people. But you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. All right, do 18 again. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people. But you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. All right, let's do the whole thing, and then I'm going to actually have you kind of work together to try to, test each other, say it with each other, and get more reps reciting these two verses here. Let's do the whole thing together, line by line. You shall not hate your brother in your heart, but you shall reason frankly with your neighbor, lest you incur sin because of him. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. All right, take 2 minutes, and like I said, do this with each other, test each other, prompt each other, kind of maybe, read a little bit, have your neighbor fill it in, go back and forth. See if you can get more reps reciting these 2 verses. See how close we can get to committing it to memory here in class. Take 2 minutes to work together on these 2 verses. Okay. Anybody want to say, I can do it? I'm going to stand up right here, fulfill the objective, say it for everybody. You got it, Mike? You got the last one? Well, the last 2. You can at least do the last 2? Last 2, right? Okay. Anybody want to try it with me? All right. You shall not hate your brother in your heart, but you shall reason frankly with your neighbor, lest you incur sin because of him. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against the sons of your own people, but, Mike, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. Cool. Yes. I think so. Yeah, I think it's all basically referring to the same group. Now, and that kind of gets us into, and this was said earlier, you said this, other people said this, that you have in these, in this moral code, like statements and then expansions on those statements, right? So you have this one, for instance, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, okay? And in these 2 verses, the language of your brother, your neighbor, the sons of your own people, your neighbor, yes, I'm taking that all to mean the same basic category of people, but then you drop down to verse 33 of the same chapter, okay? When a stranger, and that to me is almost like a different group, right? When a stranger sojourns with you in your land, you shall not do him wrong. You shall treat the stranger who sojourns with you as the native among you, and you shall love him as yourself. For you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God, right? So I think in these verses you have the principle of, okay, you're all living together in community. So your brothers and sisters, your neighbors, right? You're all children of the same Father, so you love each other as you love yourself. But then as the law expands, just a few verses later, it includes, like, oh, by the way, when other people come in that you may not think fit into this category because they're sojourners among you, you apply the same love them as yourself as you apply to each other, right? Okay. All right. We're running a little bit short on time, so we are going to keep going. And that's actually a good segue because one of the questions I think in your booklet was about, that's the basic command. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. How do you see that expanded or, more details given to that? What does it look like in the rest of these laws in these chapters? And this was already been mentioned, so we'll just kind of underscore it and move on. There is a particular focus, I hope you picked up on, in these chapters of relationship. I'll call it a relationship of inequality, right? So a servant or a slave that you have, right? There's an inequality of power, right? There's the poor, that you're leaving the corners of your field and you're leaving the fallen grapes for them, okay? There's an inequality of wealth. We just mentioned the sojourner, the one who's unequal maybe in his native status or in his comfort level among you. You're loving him as you love yourself. To Steve's lesson this morning, there was that verse about respecting the old among you, right? And honoring them. And there was about honoring your parents, okay? Commands about the blind and the deaf, okay? So the love your neighbor as yourself command that's at the heart of this, I think, expands out and does have a particular focus in this section on doing for those, as John said earlier, who can't do for themselves, okay? And then the other theme, I think, that has already been mentioned by you all, this repeated statement, I am the Lord, connects with the repeated warnings about practicing the idol worship or the behaviors associated with idol worship. I think even some of that stuff about the tattoos, cutting your bodies, the necromancers, the mediums, all that stuff fits into the category. Obviously, the sacrificing your children to Molech. And so there's this repeated reminder of avoiding the practices of idolatry, the things associated with idolatry, and the frequent reminder along those lines of I am Yahweh. Yes, Steve, one thing, and then we're going to move on here.
Chapter 5 and in other places, Jesus makes it clear and takes it to the next level, which is love your enemies. Okay? Is that something that you can see in Leviticus as a command or a part of this ideology around loving your neighbor?
I think so. I mean, yes, clearly Jesus is pushing these commands farther. He's fulfilling them in himself, right? I thought about this some. Jesus uses the language, and then 1 John picks up on it. When he talks about love, he says it's a new command, but it's not really a new command, but it is a new command. It's not really new because it's right here in Leviticus. But Jesus shows it to us in a way that is so much more full, and we can understand it. I think the love your enemies is similar. I mean, I just read, in response to Mike's question, it says later on in the chapter, someone who's a non-Israelite, you love them as you love yourself, right? They seem to have missed that by the time of Jesus and thought, well, if you're not an Israelite, I don't have to love you. Well, no, Leviticus says you love the sojourner as you love your neighbor, as you love yourself, right? But obviously in the gospel and in Jesus, that love for your enemy does take on an even more full kind of meaning, primarily because Jesus, while we were enemies, laid down his life for us. So I think the answer is basically yes and no. And again, there's that dynamic of it's a new commandment, but not really a new commandment. All right.
And that's what I struggled with. A non-Israelite might not necessarily be an enemy.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying? But I see what you're saying, and I think there's credence in that.
Thank you. Yeah, and again, the Good Samaritan parable is again, one of those instances of Jesus doing exactly what I'm talking about. He's expanding this out to say, the essence of the law now applies universally for all, whatever. All right. Where does this command show up in the New Testament? We're going to have to run through this a little bit. By the way, there is one, maybe even to Steve's point. This is not up there, but remember in Matthew 5 when Jesus says, it's not just you shall not murder, but it's the way you think about, it's the no insult, don't whatever. And but right here in Leviticus it says don't hate your brother in your heart, right? So that was not new for Jesus to say, it's not just don't murder. There's how you think about your brother too. I mean, Leviticus says don't hate your brother in your heart. So Jesus is picking up on that and reminding them of what God has really always wanted all along. Okay, but in terms of this particular commandment of loving your neighbor, later on, this is the passage that Steve referred to. He clarifies that love your neighbor applies to all, even those who are your enemies or who persecute you. This commandment shows up in Matthew 22, and there's other corollaries in Luke and in Mark. What's the greatest commandment? Jesus was asked. He says that love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and your mind is the first and greatest. The second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets. Again, this is basically the same principle that y'all picked up on earlier, which is that there's the kind of basic command, the foundational command, and then there's the expansion of the command. Jesus says, yeah, that's how it works. Love God, love your neighbor. That's it, right? That's the list. But then from there depends everything else. Everything else is unpacked from love God, love your neighbor. And then Paul will say something similar in Romans 13, another quotation of the same passage. He says, the commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and any other commandment are summed up in this word. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law. So a couple things. One, I think Paul is doing something similar to what Mike did. There you go, Mike. You're on the same level as the Apostle Paul. Paul reads the law and says, really, all these things here are boiled down in the Ten Commandments and boiled down in love your neighbor as yourself. But Paul is also, I think, in these letters and in passages like this, Paul is encouraging us as Christians to do exactly what Mike was talking about. Stop kind of wrangling and finding loopholes by saying, well, I can't, it doesn't say I can't do this. No, he says, no, you take the basic command, love your neighbor as yourself, and you apply that fully. And think about what would love do to a neighbor, okay? That's the essence of the law. It's love your neighbor as yourself. You think about what it is that love would do. It does no wrong to a neighbor, and you live that out to your brother or your sister. All right, and then James 2 basically says the same thing. If you really fulfill the royal law according to Scripture, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. You are doing well. But if you show partiality, you are committing sin. By the way, you may remember that the context of James 2 is one of these relationships of inequality. The context of James 2 is the poor man who comes into your assembly, and he says, don't say, oh, no, you gotta sit in the back, you gotta, sit on the ground, make room for other people that are more important. When a rich person comes in, you say, oh, come to the front, place of honor. That's what James is talking about, and we know the context of Leviticus 19, so it makes perfect sense that James would say, what do you do when there's this inequality of status or of wealth? You do exactly what the law has commanded us to do. Love your neighbor as yourself, and show no partiality based on appearances, based on wealth, based on status, or anything else. All right? We are running out of time, maybe out of time, but this last objective here was about the difference between the purity laws and the moral laws, okay? We've done some of this already, okay? But remember the passages in the New Testament that talk about the law, the symbols of the law, the rituals of the law, the worship of the law, the idea of clean and unclean. Just a list of passages that we could look at that are clear to say these things find their substance in Christ, and so the specific laws fade away or are not binding in the same way as they were before. Right? We saw that in Galatians 3 with the law being a tutor. We're no longer under the law, but it led us to Christ. Colossians 2, Paul says, don't let anyone pass judgment on you with food or drink or Sabbath or these other things, right? Because the substance is in Christ. We see Peter being commanded to eat unclean foods. We see Mark says in Mark 7 that Jesus declares all foods clean, okay? So I think all of that generally tells us about the ritual laws, the ritual purity of Leviticus is fulfilled in Christ. And so we don't follow those laws in the same way. We don't bind them on one another, okay? Yet, we've already seen today, I want you to think about the implications of this. In terms of morality and in terms of our behavior, the way we treat other people, okay? Jesus, Paul, James, they quote from Leviticus and say the moral authority of the law still holds. The moral commands in terms of high sexual standards, in terms of the way you love other people, the way that you treat people that are below you, all of that, I think, carries over. There is a difference between those ritual laws and the moral laws, and the morality of Leviticus continues in terms of the way that, especially the way that we treat other people. And really all of these, and you saw that in the last paragraph, I should encourage you to go back and read Leviticus 20, verse 22 to 26. Really there's a summary statement of keeping all the laws of God, including the unclean and clean foods and the ritual laws, because you shall be holy to me, for I, the Lord, am holy. And God is teaching his people in Leviticus that holiness, separateness, is about the morality. It's also about the other stuff too, a pattern of life that is set apart for the Lord because we are his people and he dwells with us. All right, so we'll pick up there on next time, and we're actually going to, first of all, we're skipping, because we already did 20, 21, and 22. We're skipping to 23 to 25, and we're going to do 2 classes in one. So in your booklet, class number 8 and class number 9, it's the feast and the Sabbath stuff. We're doing all that together on next Sunday, so get ready for that. Appreciate the class today.